These webinars happen every Wednesday, but today is a special time because we have the phenomenal Victoria Thompson here with us. If you were a part of IdeaCon, or really a couple months even prior to IdeaCon, you might have seen her name. She was one of our thought leaders, and she just always brings such inspirational content to the forefront of conversations. And today is no different. Today's topic is all about knowing your worth and navigating the educational landscapes. I think it's something that we can all benefit from. I'd love to encourage you to use the chat during this session if you have any questions, or if you have any moments where you're like, yes, I completely agree, or I don't agree, and here's why. We're going to utilize the chat so that we can streamline this process and make sure we honor the space for Victoria to speak. At the very end of the session today, you'll get your link for your professional development hour. Whitney and I will be able to help you through that in case you have any issues. It's just a Google form. And at the end of the link, after filling it out, you'll get your certificate for completion of your PDH, and you can just upload that straight to ISB. But without further ado, I'd love to introduce you to Victoria Thompson. Hi, Victoria. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, and who else is with you today?
Ren.
Yay, we have to introduce Ren too.
He's always Ren. Here.
Yes.
He's got on his, I'll show y'all, he's got on his little monogrammed sweater today, so. Most stylish miniature pincher on the block.
Agreed.
All right.
All right, so go ahead and take it away.
All right, cool. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, so give me just a second. And we're going to make it nice and big. And we're also going to go ahead and press the presentation button. And here we go. So as Lindsay mentioned, welcome everybody. I am so excited to be here with y'all today to talk about a topic that is really just near and dear to my heart, which is knowing your worth and then navigating various educational landscapes, regardless of whether you're an administrator, in the classroom, you're a consultant, you're working with an organization. These things are really challenging and really tricky sometimes. So I really wanted to call to attention how important we are and how important our voices are. And then on top of that, what we can do to continue that conversation. So again, my name is Victoria Thompson. If you're on Twitter, you are more than welcome to follow along, tag me, anything at Victoria the Tech, which is where I'm the most active. It is also where you'll find like my website and things that I'm up to. My dog always makes special guest appearances. You'll see travels and bread recipes and a bunch of fun stuff. But I think it's important to just kind of lay out the landscape and talk a little bit about who I am. That way, like, you know why this is so important to me. So that's my face on the left, and then my background is on the right. So I'm a proud product of New Jersey K-12 public education. I was born and raised in Marlton, New Jersey, which is south of the Philadelphia area. So South Jersey, not northern or central. And that really shaped a lot of what I honestly view as just kind of self-advocacy and also figuring out what it looks like to stand up for myself. New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, they have a reputation for folks that are kind of in your face. I wouldn't necessarily say I'm in your face, but I will say that I do stand up for myself. And my parents and my community were extremely formative in that. Self-advocacy is a learned skill. And that's a lot of where I did a lot of that formative, hey, this is what it looks like. I no longer live in New Jersey, however. I do live in the Seattle area. So I'm in Tacoma, Washington. That is about an hour south of Seattle. And I love it here. And I'm sitting in my Disney Parks themed home office right now. My background, because I do come from education extensively, I was a STEM educator in South Carolina and Washington State for about 5 to 6 years. I usually err on the side of 6 because it's closer to that. And then I was also a digital learning coach for about 2. So when I think about my trajectory into my current role at Microsoft, I am an education industry executive. Fancy title. If I were to kind of boil it down into my 3 big tasks, I manage the MIE and MIE expert programs. So that's Microsoft Innovative Educator, essentially Microsoft's version of like the Google, the Apple, the Adobe, that stuff. And I love it. I also am in a lot of conversations where there's a CTO, a CIO, and a principal, and no one is agreeing, and I'm the one that makes everybody happy at the end of the day. And then 3, I find ways that I can collaborate with awesome educators and really just give experience and also work with them to make sure that the workload is off of their shoulders. So if you need a training, I'm there. You need a webinar, I'm there. So there's a lot of things that I do in my role, but I love it. And when I think about my trajectory from like protecting my time, it took years for me to figure out exactly where I wanted to be and also what I wanted to do. And we'll talk about that a little later. So I'm also conscious of who I am outside of my job. So I'm a wife to my wife, Courtney. Today is her birthday. She's 32. So she's out running right now. You might see her pop in. But we love Walt Disney World. We are annual pass holders. Lindsay and I were actually in Disney during the same time. So that was really exciting. And yes, I do fly from Seattle to Orlando and back every single time. I am a Real Housewives of New York super fan. So if any of y'all do Real Housewives or Bravo TV, you got me. And then on top of that, I am a bread lover. I love to cook and bake. The kitchen is really my maker space and also how I de-stress at the end of multiple days. But this is about me. And that's also enough about me. So we're now going to get into the thick of things and really talk about why it's important for us to know our worth and navigate educational landscapes. So my dad is a very important person to me. He's also on Twitter. So if you are on social media, you can follow him at Tweets from Dad 1, where he essentially gives like inspirational quotes, and he loves the Muppets and talks about the Muppets, and everything is Muppet land for him. But when I was growing up, and then even now as an adult, sometimes if things don't happen the way that I think that they will, or maybe if I'm disappointed in an outcome, or maybe if I think that I'm entering a space where I feel like I'm valued and I don't get that reciprocal response, I always reach out to him just for guidance, anything, right? Like wisdom, anything that you can get from someone that's been in that space. And every time he says the same thing. So this is my dad. His name is Sean Thompson. And you'll take a look at the quote and it says, "Not everywhere you fit in is where you belong." And I'll say that again. Not everywhere you fit in is where you belong. And for me, that resonates so much because you can fit in a lot of different spaces, but the feeling of fitting in versus the feeling of belonging, those are two entirely different things. So when I think about the concept of belonging, it really does come from not only are we just existing, but how are we contributing and how are people celebrating us? Celebration is a really big part of it. If you're not being acknowledged, if people think that you're not bringing value, even though you are, right? We're all important, we all bring value. Or maybe if there are areas where, maybe you're given feedback and they're not receptive and they kind of view you as an outlier, you might fit, but you might not belong. So I always think about this quote in particular when thinking about belonging as a whole, because when I'm in a workplace or when I'm in an organization or when I'm with my friends or anywhere, I just don't want to be, I want to be great and I want to belong. So I just want y'all to think about that for a second. So if not everywhere you fit in is where you belong, then what might exactly that mean for workspaces, for credentialing, and then also if you're looking to transition for work, are you just fitting in or are you belonging? What does that look like in your respective space? And speaking of respective spaces, this session as a whole actually came from a Twitter thread, as a lot of things that I do. Lindsay and I were kind of going back and forth with my friend Alicia Sewell, who's a friend and colleague. She and I do the Trust Black Women in EdTech, which is focused on knowing your worth in EdTech spaces as people of color. And I was kind of thinking about how, and if you take a look at the quote tweet, that's what she said at the bottom, right? Be mindful of edu celebs. And that's kind of like a term that we'll use where people have large followings and they're not in the classroom anymore. They travel all the time, right? What they'll do is they'll post questions about everything. What do you think about school funding? Do you know anybody that has an insight into the art club? What do you think about the state of education today? Would you go back into the classroom? What do you need from your administration? Those types of things. And the questions seem very tame at first. You'll notice that what Alicia said, though, is that you're liable to see if your thoughts or ideas in their book or blog post where they'll make money off of your intellectual property. So taking that back and scaling that back a minute, there are multiple times and also areas where sometimes I'll go on social media, or maybe I'll go on a site like Teachers Pay Teachers, and I'll see bits and pieces of what I've said and what I've done repurposed. All of the stuff that I have for my educators, I provide for free. I provide it for free because I think that it is a service that is needed. And the free stuff that I provide, it's something that I created in 5 minutes or less. If there's something that needs compensation, I absolutely bring that up front. But if it's like a conversation log, like a template, I'm more than willing to share that. Even the STEM cooking curriculum that I did 2 years prior, I shared that free of charge because that was a collaborative effort and we all agreed this should be free. However, when I think about what it means where there are people that are poaching ideas and also poaching content and then profiting off of it because they have a name, that does not sit well with me. And I'm fairly certain it wouldn't sit well with a lot of y'all. And when I think about how this parlays into larger landscapes, when I talk to Alicia and I talk to a lot of folks about this, there's not a lot of people that I think we can all agree we know personally who are edu celebrities or people that speak at large. I can maybe count them on one hand that not only do this for a living, but that's where they make their primary source of income. When I think about people who have jobs like us, you know, they're out in the trenches, they're in the fields, they might be working for organizations or working for training partners. They're not necessarily taking this and writing books. They're also not necessarily taking this and going to, you know, different types of conferences and whatnot. But what they are doing is that they're taking this information and they're taking it to meetings. And you'll notice that in my tweet that I have above, right, what they'll do is they'll post these things or they'll post these giant questions, or maybe they'll do a call for content. And then what happens is you give all this information. Then what happens is they erase your name, or they can erase your name depending on the person, because I've been credited, but I also have not been credited. Then what happens is they'll siphon that information back into their blog post or their website. And then suddenly they're profiting and they get all the views. And then you're looking around and you're like, oh my goodness, this is the content that I actually responded to. So I am extremely particular as to who I respond to, how I respond, and also what I say. If it's something casual, like, do you like pizza? Yes, I like pizza, absolutely. But if it's something like, what are the largest issues facing education today? I steer clear of that, because then sometimes that spirals into another conversation. Or my personal favorite, least favorite, wanting to pick your brain. There was something that happened to me literal hours ago where someone contacted me saying that they were basically commissioned to write a series of STEM articles. And they were wondering if they could pick my brain, that way I could enhance their article. That's compensation. You want me to enhance your work? Then you get to pay me. As educators, though, we are kind of conditioned to believe that the work that we're doing is good and that sometimes we shouldn't ask for compensation because we're doing it out of the goodness of our heart. And I've got rules, which I'll share later on, about what I do for free, what I ask for compensation for. But ultimately, if you don't know me like that, and I don't know you like that, and you're asking for my input in order to enhance something that you're doing, I have a problem with that. So it's the meetings, it's the articles, the videos, the blog posts. People are scouring in order to figure out just kind of what happens. And scouring in a like small sense isn't necessarily bad. Like, I scour the internet for the best tacos. I also scour the internet for like best places to eat. I scour the internet for best vacation spots. What I'm not doing, though, is that I am not then writing a blog post profiting off of what somebody else has done. Or I'm not, writing a Twitter thread off of the work that somebody else has accomplished. That's that line that in education we haven't really figured out yet. You know, we're trying our hardest to one, do our jobs, and two, show our worth, but we also don't want to make sure that people are exploiting us at that time. So thinking of that, there are several folks that are really looking to transition right now, or if they're staying in education, they're finding ways to up-level their skills. And these are just facts. Like my resignation, even though I did have something else lined up, I was the 7th resignation in 4 weeks. There have been, I believe, 2 more resignations since then. I was the only one with something lined up. Everybody else just kind of threw their hands up and said, I think I'm out of here. I've got friends that are looking to stay, but also thinking about how they can best add value. And sometimes adding value is not staying in that same position for 8 years. You know, maybe they're looking to transition from 8th grade math to high school math, or maybe they're looking to transition from elementary teaching to instructional coaching. At the end of the day, it's all about improvement and skill set. So my mind automatically goes to, what can we do to protect our integrity and then also protect our specific intellectual property? Because we all have a lot of greatness going on within ourselves. It's important to protect it, and it's also important to let people know that we are worth it. So I just talked a lot, which means that it's time for y'all to do some stuff for me. So I am going to stop sharing this screen and give me just a second so I can transition into our Mentimeter activity for today. Oop, that's the next slide. You got a sneak peek. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and go to my Menti. If you've never used Mentimeter, this is absolutely one of my favorite tools. At my last school site, they had a saying for me: if it ain't free, it ain't me. Because some of these topics are extremely, you know, not just expensive with licenses, but it just doesn't give us a lot of opportunity for flexibility. What I appreciate about Mentimeter is that there's a lot of opportunity, and then you can do word cloud, you know, different types of bar graphs. You can do word statements, you can do pictures. Very, very, very cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share this and walk you through what we're going to do. The first thing we're going to do is a word cloud. The second thing that we're going to do is just a simple true false. And what I'd like for us to think about is the compare contrast here. So I'm going to go ahead and screen share now that I've got everything lined up. To get there, you'll see at the top, you're going to be going to www.menti.com. And I'll also go ahead and type that into the chat box so that way we have it. There's the chat box, www.menti.com. And then the code is going to be this 1497221. So that information is in the chat. Says voting is closed. I've got voting open officially. And the first question that I'd like for y'all to kind of think about and respond to is, what are 3 words that you'd use to describe yourself? I left this vague for a purpose. You can do professional, you can do personal. It is entirely up to you. What are 3 words that you'd use to describe yourself? And since I'm on the computer, I'm going to respond with my phone. And you'll notice this word cloud, I'm hands off. I'm not doing anything with it. Mentimeter will literally create the word cloud for you, which is wonderful. All right, we've got some responses coming in, which is lovely. And you'll notice as more responses come in, right, the words that are being highlighted or typed in the most will appear larger. And it seems like our three largest right now, passionate is taking the lead. And then we've got creative, we've got resourceful, caring, ambitious, resourceful, hardworking, driven, patient. Patience is my word for this year. I've been told ever since I was a kid, I'm not a patient person. So I'm trying to be patient. I don't know how well it's working, but, but I'm trying my hardest. Oh, man. Crafty, empathetic, introvert, organized. Yes. So what I'm finding in the word clouds whenever I ask for people, because I do this in a lot of my sessions, what are words that you'd like to describe? We're highlighting the positive, and that comes from always seeing just who we are positively whenever we're presenting in front of other folks. We are professional. We are compassionate. We are caring. We are dedicated. We are resourceful. We are driven. So just thinking about what that looks like, what I'd like for us to do next before we go to the next one is we're going to do a waterfall. And if you've never done waterfall, what's going to happen is I'm going to ask for you right now to think about a takeaway that you see from this word cloud. So what is one thing that resonates with you? What's one thing that maybe you have a question about? Or maybe what's one thing that you'd like clarity on? And I'll say 2 minutes. My clock, since I'm on West Coast, says 2:53. I'll bump up to 2:54 since I feel like it's about to change. My spidey senses are tingling. So what you're going to do is just type in the chat box. Like don't press enter, don't do anything. Just type what resonates with you, what you have questions about, what might you need clarity on. And when I say waterfall, I will let you know when to press enter. We're going to see all the responses come through like a waterfall. So take a moment, type, but do not press enter. What resonates with you? What questions do you have? What do you need clarity on? And I'll let you know when it's time to press enter. And I'll set my alarm. All right, so we've got about 30 seconds. Janine, that's a great question. We'll be doing it in the chat box. So we're not going to do it on Mentimeter. We're doing it in the chat box on Zoom. All right, and 3, 2, 1, and waterfall. So go ahead and press enter. That way we can see all of the lovely responses from y'all. And I see a lot. I see educator passion gets leveraged against them because of it. We'll be talking about exploitation of empathy in just a little bit. Self-selection of personality character. Yep, not the normal teacher, honored to be part of this group. This group tends to be hardworking doers, people who take initiative to watch a webinar or care. And I love Idea Illinois. I think it's interesting that most of us said passionate. We love teaching so much. We are staying in a super stressful system. Encourages participation and anonymity, and I can never pronounce it. the A word. So there's no fear of making mistakes. Educators' passion gets leveraged against them because they will always do what's best for kids. Educators must be resourceful when teaching in an underfunded, or inequitably funded school. Resonated with me. Sincere is my favorite. Mentee is new for me. Very clever. Yep. Yeah. And if you have any questions, just let me know and I'd be happy to facilitate. All right. How much longer can teachers remain passionate when they are constantly having to be resourceful and patient? How hardworking and dedicated we all are, reflective, passionate. This is a good question. How do you not overwhelm people if you are so driven, right? That's kind of how much longer can we remain passionate when we have to be resourceful and patient? So how can we show that we're creative, or how do we get people to be creative? All right. All great stuff that we've got here. And then my next question, again, same in the Mentimeter. If you're not familiar with imposter syndrome, that's what happens when you look around and you think, I don't know if I should be in this room right now. I don't know if I should be here. I don't know how I got hired for this job. I don't know what I'm doing right now. So I'd like for you to just answer candidly. And again, this is all anonymous, which is what I love about Mentimeter. Have you ever been in a position where you have gone through imposter syndrome, where you just feel like maybe you might not be in the right place? All right, I look at all these numbers and they're definitely climbing for true if I take a look. And then if I look at false, it's pretty much remaining at that 1. So when I think about what we said regarding the word cloud, where we're passionate, right? We're energized, we are resourceful, we're sincere. And then I always like to juxtapose it with this true false, because we know our worth and we know who we are. We're extremely overwhelmed right now. We were overwhelmed before. The pandemic just highlighted all of the cracks that then we were being asked to fix. When we think about who we are emotionally, professionally, and personally, we're in a space where we understand who we are and our worth. And I always like to bring up this imposter syndrome because it's always so different from the word cloud to the true false. We are not imposters. We're important. We bring value, and our voices are extremely valuable in every single space that we touch. Even though we might not feel that moment, the words that we use to define ourselves can help us carve out what we want to do, how we want to be, and also how we want to lead, regardless of where you are in your career pathway. So what I'm going to be doing is stop sharing this. And I'm actually going to hop back over to the presentation. Come on, Zoom. All right, there we go. All right, I'm going to make it nice and big again so that way we can see. And tangentially related to what we just talked about, a lot of imposter syndrome comes from, again, I don't know if I'm here because nobody's asking me anything. A recent statistic stated that 49% of employees have reported that they haven't been asked for their ideas. I certainly have been in that space before. How many of you, either in the chat box or maybe if you want to do a reaction, have been in spaces where the school leadership team or maybe like the organizational leadership team, they've been handpicked based off of perception? Or maybe there's an application, but we're not exactly sure what the application looked like. I remember at the very first school that I looked at, it was an application for the leadership team. There were, I want to say, about 15 of us in a school of 48. However, the same 3 people were routinely asked for questions and ideas because they were considered like the leaders of the leadership team. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that that's like bad. It's always good to have go-to people, but to consistently go to those go-to people, who are you valuing, and then what is the worth there? And I see Seth. So glad you're here, by the way, Seth. In your chat, you said, and I completely agree, if we've got imposter syndrome, we are at the right place. because we're here for a reason. We have value and we have worth. So I remember at my first school when I was in South Carolina, I was scratching my head thinking, okay, well, I don't really know why I'm on the leadership team if nobody's asking for my ideas. However, I was put on the leadership team for a purpose. I submitted the application and was accepted because they found value in what I had to say. So that self-advocacy being that learned skill is something that I had to learn. I was fitting in, but I wasn't belonging. So then the question became, how do I belong and what does belonging look like when there's a very clear hierarchy? And that 49%, of course, we'd all like to see dwindle. We want to make sure that we're being asked for our ideas and our expertise. But if we're not, what do we do to make sure that we're amplifying ourselves? And this kind of goes into the importance of really knowing our worth. So I always like to begin by saying you are valuable, as I've been saying, and so is your knowledge. And I will repeat, you are valuable, and so really is your knowledge. Looking at large, a lot of times, and I'm also seeing in the chat, when you ask for ideas, people don't speak up. Self-advocacy is a learned skill. And I've been in positions where I might be surrounded by 50 people and I don't want to speak up in a group of 50, but maybe I'll connect with somebody later on, or maybe I'll send a follow-up email, or maybe I'll arrange a one-on-one. There are situations that definitely call for our expertise, but it might not be in a group of like 100 plus people, and that's okay. What I find frustrating sometimes, and then again, this is like school leader lens, is I was working with a principal not long ago and she said, when I ask for ideas, like people don't talk, but she wasn't really giving those avenues. It was always during the big district meetings where there were 1,000 plus people and people just didn't feel comfortable. So if we value, of course, the folks that are around us and the people that are there, what we'll do, and what I can also help y'all do, which I'll show, is let's create avenues. Let's see who's got the ideas and let's amplify them in that space. That comes from also thinking about, what are you passionate about? I have been asked to speak for a lot of different things, and most of the stuff is completely within my wheelhouse. But when like a future farmer student association reaches out to me, I don't have a leg to stand on, because the most that I do for farming and agriculture is the herb garden that is in my front yard, and then the other like violas and tulips that I have around my yard. I'm not the best candidate for that. But what I do is I pay it forward and say, hey, here are some people I've already reached out to that are versed in this topic that are willing to speak. My passions are educational technology, equity, STEM education, in particular mathematics, and then also diversifying the workforce. So I know my worth whenever I bring to those spaces and whenever I'm in those spaces. And I stray from it sometimes based off of essentially like literacy, for example. Even though I'm STEM education, I believe literacy is everybody's responsibility. So I will talk and give sessions on like STEM and literacy, but really narrowing down that passion is even more crucial to just kind of knowing your worth and where you stand. And then, as always, your voice is really powerful, so use it. Again, that is a learned skill. It took me years to get to the space where I can feel comfortable standing up for myself in a way that makes sense for me and the organizations that I work for. However, it's powerful. Even if it's not standing up in person, there are a lot of other avenues for you to do that. So let's talk about what happens when we navigate education. And this happens really when we show up, I say at large, right? That's kind of bird's eye view. Classrooms, schools, organizations. We walk in, they think that we're teachers. I've been in tech full time for about 3 years now, and they're still like, hey, she's the math teacher, which is awesome. Like, I love that folks are still identifying with me in that space. But that also means that whenever I enter those spaces, they come in with preconceived notions. And I don't know if y'all have been in those spaces as educators, coaches, school leaders, and beyond, but there are some times where we enter spaces and people just kind of think things. And what they think about is those workplace politics. There might be hierarchies. I remember, again, when I taught in South Carolina, there was a teacher that didn't get a position at a school because so-and-so's grandfather heard her talk about like her, what was it? Honeymoon, bachelorette party, something, where then someone thought that it was immoral, for someone to be out and about doing whatever. And then they came back and then they had the job and then they didn't. I remember when I was at Home Depot in shorts one day, and a parent ended up calling my school administration saying that it was immoral for me to be wearing shorts on a Saturday at 10 a.m. in Home Depot in South Carolina. Now, when you have administration that backs you up, it is a phenomenal thing. If you don't have administration that backs you up, and if you hear like growling, this little guy ran on my lap is sleeping. But if you take a look at just kind of what the landscape looks like, if there's workplace politics, and maybe if somebody happens to know somebody, then you might get called into the office and get reprimanded. Navigating that is always really tricky, especially as a new educator, because your job is on the line. And I remember, again, like even now, I'm the sole earner while, my wife is in nursing school and she's starting to work and figure that out, but she's fairly new in that clinicals process. When I was in South Carolina, teaching was my only job. Same in Washington before I transitioned into tech. We have bills to pay. And sometimes navigating those workplace and classroom politics are hard, because if you might have somebody in the PTA or the school board or somebody that happens to be in your classroom, then things might get sticky, and that's hard to navigate in education. And I see, because Janine, you and I, we were right on the same wavelength, that nepotism can be pervasive in some sections of education, and sometimes people use it to the detriment of our careers. But again, that's knowing your worth. I've left institutions where this happens, and I think, if I can find somewhere else, I'm going to find somewhere else, because this is not worth my peace of mind. What you're also doing is you're working with multiple populations and identities, depending on where your school is, your organization, your anything. You're working with a lot of different types of folks. And if you've never worked with multiple populations or multiple grade levels or anything, depending on your role, that is a space to navigate. My background is elementary education. I've exclusively worked in middle and high schools, 5th, 6th, and high school, right? So whenever I think about that elementary segment, right, that's a different population from what I was trained than what I've done. Balancing home and work is also a big spot. I want to make sure that when I come home, I'm fully home. I want to make sure that when I go out to dinner, I'm not checking my phone or I'm not on email or doing anything ridiculous. I want to make sure that I'm giving my full attention to my wife and then this little guy who has just woken up. So when I think about that work-life balance, that's important. It's also important for us to maintain our credentials and skills, because sometimes if that doesn't keep up, then our jobs might be at risk. Or if we're looking to transition to work, then we just might not have those skills or credentials. And then, as always, just seeking those opportunities for professional development. That's a landscape that I'm still trying to figure out. I actually posted the other day, because I was doing a comparison of like accepted proposals versus not accepted proposals. And I tooth and nail, right? Go through with a fine tooth comb. This is my purpose. These are my like objectives and everything. And then sometimes I look at proposals and it really doesn't have that, if that makes sense. So when I seek opportunities for PD, I personally don't want it to be 60 apps in 60 minutes. I want it to be like the meat of the content. But the 60 apps in 60 minutes does get a lot of folks. So that's like a political area that we do navigate. And then when I think about other professional spaces, it's the same with working with multiple personalities. Sometimes adults are harder to work with than kids. I found that out real quick when I became a coach. I also found that out real quick when I was a teacher, when I first started out. The students were sometimes not the hardest part of my job. The adults and navigating those personalities was the hardest part of my job sometimes. And when we're navigating these spaces together and all trying to not only show our worth, but also make people understand where we're coming from. I've said this before, but I'm going to say it again. We need to advocate for ourselves, but really self-advocacy is a learned skill. This is a work in progress. It's not going to be snap, jump, we got it. There need to be just kind of moments where you think and you reflect and you learn and you figure out who you talk to, and then you also make sure that you're following up. And not only that, but you let them know up front who you are. So I'll just kind of share with you my process of how I've learned all of this. So professional websites and portfolios are definitely a big thing for me, not just to kind of like keep myself in check, because sometimes I'll do something and did I do that? Oh, did I write about it? The website is crucial. I'm actually in the process of updating mine, so you're not going to see the full, but you're going to see some of it. I'm a big fan of professional signatures. It just helps bring credibility to your space. Even in like the email signatures I did when I was in the classroom, I loved having that personal touch. I'll share with you my template for my statements of work, which are SOW, which is if somebody does reach out to you to pick your brain, you can tell them up front what the price is, and then my also contact log and timelines for just if you want to keep in contact with folks, or if you're trying to figure out, what next steps are based off of conversations. All righty, I'm going to stop sharing this. I'm going to hop on over to my Microsoft Edge in just a second. I'm on what I refer to as the one screen struggle right now. So I definitely appreciate y'all's patience as I kind of go through my screens and whatnot. All right. First things first, we are going to go ahead and do the website check. So if you do not have a professional website or portfolio, I highly, highly, highly recommend that you have it. What I'm going to show y'all is the website that I use. Actually, in a prior life, used Google Sites. I am in the midst of figuring out, whether I want to convert that to like a Microsoft Sway or maybe do like a WordPress or something at larger scale. But again, if it ain't free, it ain't me. So when I was first starting out about 3 years ago, really bolstering my portfolio, that way people could see what I've done, then I am here. So as I mentioned, fully not published yet. I went through the process of updating today. So you'll see that it's still got like STEM coach. It doesn't have my current role at Microsoft on there yet, but I just try to keep it nice and simple. And when I think about knowing your worth and also just kind of giving people a full picture of who you are, think about what you've done and also how this relates to what you can bring value to. So I very derogatorily was called Victoria the Tech when I was student teaching, because I had a student or a mentor teacher rather, who just was very anti-technology. She didn't care for it. What I did was I kind of repurposed that. And that's why my Twitter handle is Victoria the Tech, right? Like y'all told me that I was this and you thought that technology was not innovative. This is my way of sharing and showing how this is innovative in all of the spaces that I am in. And if any of you, like if you're interested in having me look at your websites or portfolios, shoot me an email. I have my email at the very end of this presentation. I'd be more than happy to help and also just kind of take a look and see what we can do. That way we can identify your areas of passion. But you'll see it's got me, it's got my face. It's got a little bit about me. Hey, Cordy. My wife is back. Okay, so I pull out some highlights. So last year I was named one of the EdTech Magazine's top 30 IT influencers to follow in the world. Literally, I was in my office. My phone was going off. I was getting all these congratulations messages. I said, congratulations for what? I don't think I did anything. I look online, my face is everywhere. That's a huge honor and accomplishment. And at first I was kind of sheepish about it. I didn't necessarily want my face out there, but again, that's knowing your worth. I am the kind of person where this is something to celebrate. And again, work in progress. Took me a while to celebrate it, but let's go ahead and celebrate. It's got a little bit of the snapshots of my work. So I do write for Edutopia. I have my articles and also my profile there as well. I've got also just kind of things I've done, blog posts for ISTE, how I was talking about SEL with EdTech Magazine. I did a quick tip series with i2edu with my friend and colleague Maggie. That was wonderful. So I've always got those videos linked. I've been in Teacher to Teacher. I was actually featured in like a Microsoft video in October 2019 and one of the old schools that I worked at. So again, what you're passionate about. If you take a look at this, you can see that I'm passionate about EdTech, STEM, SEL with regard to digital equity, and then also just kind of making sure that folks know how to use technology in various spaces. When I think about also just like my about me, I'm very particular and also conscious about how I show up outside of my job. So what I do is I just give a little bit of information, picture of me and my wife, who is way cuter than me. I also give just who I am and why it's important for me to show up, because again, as someone in tech, it is crucial that they understand where I'm coming from. That way they just don't think I'm selling, because I'm not selling. What I'm doing is I'm trying to show you how technology can help bridge those gaps, and also what we can do to help. And that's always been what I've done as a learning coach. It's what I've done as a training partner. And then it's also what I do now with my various roles. I always have some seminars and sessions that are ready to rock and roll. So if you don't have, I would say about like 2 to 3 that you're ready to speak on, think about, again, those 2 to 3 areas that you're really passionate about. That way, if someone wants to contact you and be like, hey, can I pick your brain? No. If you pick my brain, this is the seminar or the session, and this is what we're going to talk about. I do have quite a few that I've maintained over the years. However, the really 3 that I give the most are the equity in ed tech, the culturally responsive STEM, and then I've got the X, Y, and devices. Everything else is kind of a bit of a grab bag based on what a school or district wants. But again, it's those passion topics and those passion products where I can say, okay, this is exactly what I'm passionate about, and this is what I'm going to be talking about during this time. Even if it's just to pick your brain, direct them to your website first. They don't get to pick your brain without figuring out more about who you are and what you want to do, because you don't want it to be a waste of your time. The same way where they don't want it to be a waste of theirs, you also do not want it to be a waste of yours. So I'm showing y'all the website because I always send people to my website first if they want to find out more about me, the work that I've done, how I've helped students, how I've helped educators, and how I've done digital transformation. Again, this is Google Sites, free, love it. If you're interested in transitioning to other platforms, that's okay. I am also exploring that avenue, especially now as this is becoming not just like serious, but I want like an actual URL, right? Like not the sites.google. I want, the URL there. But if you're just starting out, highly recommend. Speaking of that, if there is somebody who is interested in picking your brain and they will not relent, I'm going to go ahead and share my template for my statement of work. So this is what I give, and I'll actually type this in the chat box as SOW, because SOW stands for statement of work. And if people are just kind of relentless regarding what you want to do or sessions or, hey, can you do this for free? I've been the kind of person where I'm like, okay, let's talk a little bit about how much it might actually cost in order for you to pick my brain or like use my information in a book or have me write a book chapter. Has happened to me and countless others multiple times. So the conversation shifts from, can I pick your brain, to let's talk about how much it'll cost. And again, that is knowing your worth. I've got my name up at the top that I have, my address, my telephone, my email, all my information, as you can see, is redacted, but it does have all of that there for y'all. It also has client and point of contact. So I'll share my conversation tracker next, but this is kind of where I keep who am I in contact with, and then also how can I reach them in case we've got some questions. I always outline tasks and deliverables. So for example, if I'm giving a 1-hour webinar, then the expectation is that I do maybe 2 hours of prep beforehand and then 1 hour of webinar delivery. So I'm going to do 2 hours before I start because I need to make sure all my ducks are in a row. My actual webinar is going to be 1 hour worth of time. That's the task. That's the deliverable. Tasks is what I do before. Deliverable is what I actually do. Now, I get asked all the time as to what I charge for like seminars, sessions, Honestly, I say to people, set your charge rate, because what is different from a 1-hour webinar is different from a 10-hour symposium. It's different from a 3-hour workshop. So what I do is I actually have like a charge rate that's increased and also fluctuated based off of, when I started doing this 3 years ago, I'll say that I was at $150 an hour because that was my charge rate when I was doing consultancy for a couple of large companies. I would say never charge less than $100 an hour, because you are worth more than $100 an hour. Okay. So now that prices have changed and things like that, what I do is I have my hourly rate. And then what I do is I say, okay, if I say, I'll just give a number arbitrarily, I'll use 1,000. That is not my number. But if I say 3 hours at $1,000, then what that means is that this is now a $3,000 scope of work. You would be surprised what some folks are willing to either offer, because sometimes I've been in conversations where I'm like, okay, this sounds like $800. And they say, oh no, it's 2,000. And I'm like, okay, 2,000, let's do it. Or sometimes I've been in situations where I think it's going to be more, right? Especially for like larger workshops or maybe working with school districts. And based off of their budget, all they can offer me is $500 to $1,000. Now, what I usually do in that situation, because I love working with folks and of course, connections are great, is I say, okay, if you can only do $500 for something, let's see what you can do to like work within the budget. So if I have already parceled out $1,000 worth of work, let's see what it would take to maintain within that 500. I would say that the same also works if you're in the classroom or if you're in the school when you're working with various partners, because sometimes, especially with training or licenses or whatnot, they might ask you what your budget is, and then you might either not know what the budget is, or you might have to run it through somebody else. Ask them for their scope of work. Ask them for what they can do for you. Remember, this is always a mutual relationship between the both of y'all. So this is what I do independently, but I always ask companies, districts, schools, whatever, hey, what are you providing? And also, how can we collaborate together? Because again, that's knowing both of our worth together. And then the last thing I'll share before I turn it over to questions is I'll go ahead and take a look at the conversation tracker. Oh, and then my signature as well. And I'll also drop this into the chat. So this is conversation tracker. And this is how I keep track of all the people that I talk to. So I've got the name, I've got the dates, I've got contact info, method of contact, purpose, and action items. Essentially what this does is it narrows down who I'm communicating with and really how much I'm communicating with them. So I started this when I was at a school that was mostly Google, you'll see, because otherwise I would be using Excel. I love Excel, but this is in Google Sheets. However, what you'll notice is I can shift and also sort through various names and also purposes. So if I'm noticing that I'm meeting with Jimmy nonstop for like 10 minutes every single week about Microsoft Teams and like whether or not they can use Power Apps in Teams, then that means that maybe Jimmy needs a little bit more support. Or if I'm noticing that I'm meeting with Ren for, once weekly for office hours, then I need to kind of dive deep into figuring out what those look like. This is how I filter out not just conversations with teachers and leaders, but also conversations that I've had in the past with clients, because that's how we form these relationships. And that's how I also figure out where I'm the most worthy. Because if I'm having the same conversations with folks, with the same companies, same teachers, same schools, I might want to put my energy there more than in other spaces. So that's kind of what that tracker looks like. And then last but not least, before I go ahead and transition over to, excuse me, before I go ahead and I go ahead and transition over to questions, I always have, and this is my Microsoft email here, which I also do have. So you can message me on my Microsoft or my personal. I'm okay with either, especially if you want to like talk Microsoft. But I have my email signature here that's directly in that space. So you'll notice it's my first and last name. I am Victoria Thompson. It's got the bolded kind of like that typeface, but it just adds a bit of a personal touch whenever you're working with people, whether it's teachers, leadership, anybody, like just so that way they see your signature and they know who you are on that level. So I actually do it with like my pen, my little Surface pen. I do it in OneNote and then I copy paste, put it straight in. I've had friends that have just taken a picture of it where they write it on paper and then upload it in. But again, that's that worth, right? Like I sign my name to documents all the time. I view an email as no different. So it just adds a bit of a personal touch. All right. So I'm going to stop sharing this, and in closing, there we go. This is another quote from my dad, the first one. Just doing something when you're unsure is just as brave as doing it when you feel ready. So again, that self-advocacy is a learned skill. If you're unsure and if you need that scaffolding or those steps, I always say take the leap and you've got this, right? Know your worth, navigate those landscapes, and figure out where you belong, because that is so crucial and helpful. And then my dad's is the first bullet point. Mine is the second. Really, just those baby steps are still steps. And even if you're afraid, it's okay to start small. It is really okay to start small, no matter what you're doing, where you are. Start small, because you never know where you're going to end up. All right. And this is my contact info. Again, I'm on Twitter at Victoria the Tech. Ask me questions. I'm extremely friendly. You can go into the DMs if it doesn't need to be public. Or again, if you want to email, that's my email right there. My first name, VictoriaRoseThompson@gmail.com. If you've got a website, a resume, a portfolio, anything, maybe if you want me to look over, just send it my way, and I can see what I can do to best help you and assist you, because we are all important. We are all valuable, and it's important for us to know our worth. And Lindsay, I'll turn it over to you if anyone has questions.
Well, I can attest you are very friendly. And so everybody should reach out to you. That was an incredible session. Whitney and I were texting back and forth the whole time, and we're just, all these ideas have come to the surface just off of little one-off sentences that you said. But these quotes that both you and your father have said really resonated with me. And it's so empowering to know that you're not alone. Teaching often feels like you're in this silo, and you're the one, when the door closes, it's you and the kids, and that's it. And really, we need to lean into each other sometimes. And this was I think the perfect time to hear this message. We did have one question, and somebody was wondering if you were going to share this slide deck and presentation. I told them we're going to share this recording, of course. So
yeah, definitely. Can I email it to y'all, since it's in a PowerPoint? I can upload it to OneDrive real quick, if that's okay with everybody. That way, if they want to take it. Okay,
we'll do a recap email tomorrow with the recording and the links to the documents you shared. So I can also link it in that email to all the registrants as well.
Okay, great. Yeah. I'll put it in an email drive and I'll send it to y'all. That way you have it.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Definitely follow Victoria on Twitter. She's super responsive. Also shares some very cute pics of Ren and her family as well. But I can't thank you enough for doing this.
Yeah,
like you said, this started from Twitter, and this is something that is so important for us teachers to talk about. And I appreciate your bravery and courage and everything that you do, and feel a little bit of that bravery rubbing off on me and hopefully the rest of the people here today as well.
Thank you. Can I do a little bit of a shameless plug?
Absolutely. Always.
Yes. So for Idea Illinois, which if you don't get their newsletters, you should, because they are hilarious. So we are doing a Microsoft webinar series in May through June. So I did see in the most recent newsletter that we started promoting, which is awesome. If you're interested in just learning about different tech tools, I'll be facilitating some of those webinars. And if you liked what you saw today, you get to hear a little bit more. And it'll be a lot of great content, from Minecraft to using Immersive Reader for literacy in STEM, because I'm a big literacy fan, all the way up to being like an MIE expert, accessibility tools. We've got 8 great sessions for y'all. And if you are interested in those, definitely stop by, because we'd love to have you.
Thank you so much for saying that. Barb's already registered, she said.
All right,
Whitney put the link. Yes. Whitney put the link for that calendar of all of the sessions in there as well. I also dropped the link for the PDHs in the chat too. Man, you're good with time. Like, you were just on it. Like, it is 5:31 and we are done, right?
Yes. Yeah, I presented at a conference in New Jersey this weekend, and they're like, we need to learn pacing from you because my
sure.
sessions were like 15 minutes back to back.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you've got it. You've got it down.
Yeah. Cool.
All right, everybody. Well, we hope to see you all again soon on Victoria's other sessions. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And thank you, Victoria. And thank you, Ren.
Yeah. Ren's like, I didn't growl the whole time. This is great.
Perfect. Got a little nap in too.
Yes.